It was a dark, rainy Tuesday night. I worked at a small fried chicken restaurant down the street. It was almost 11 p.m., which meant it was time to close the shop. I was the only worker left at the front counter. I was wiping down the tables, cleaning up the grease, and thinking about my warm bed at home. I was tired, and my feet hurt from standing all day. Suddenly, the loud ring of the shop phone broke the silence. I walked behind the counter and picked up the receiver. "Thank you for calling. Are you looking to order?" I asked, using my polite customer service voice. There was no answer. I held the phone to my ear and listened closely. I did not hear any breathing. I did not hear any background noise. There was just deep, heavy silence. I thought it was a prank call or a mistake, so I hung up the phone and went back to cleaning the tables. Exactly 2 minutes later, the phone rang again. I walked back to the counter and picked it up. "Hello?" I said. Again, there was silence. I was about to put the phone down when a voice finally spoke. It was the voice of an old man. His voice sounded incredibly weak, thin, and freezing cold. It sounded like he had not spoken to anyone in years. He gave me an address on the edge of town and said he wanted a large bucket of chicken delivered immediately. I sighed quietly so he could not hear me. I really did not want to go out in the rain. I wanted to finish closing the shop and go home, but I remained professional. I called out to my manager, who was in the back office counting the money from the cash register. I told him a customer wanted a late delivery. My manager looked out of his office door. He told me that I had to take the delivery because we never turned down a paying customer. At first, I felt angry and annoyed, but then I tried to look on the bright side. I realized a late-night delivery meant a potential cash tip. In my experience, elderly customers usually gave the biggest and most generous tips. I decided the extra money would be worth the trouble. I wrote down the street address on a piece of paper. I told the old man on the phone that his food would arrive in 20 minutes. Before I could even finish my sentence, the line went dead. He had hung up on me. I thought that was very rude and strange, but I ignored it. I walked to the kitchen and asked the cook to prepare one final large order of chicken. My manager handed me the keys to the delivery car. He told me that once I finished the delivery, I did not need to come back to the shop. I could drive straight to my own house and go to sleep. He said he would finish locking up the doors and turning off the lights. A little before 11:30 p.m., the food was ready. I packed the hot box into the passenger seat of the delivery car and turned on the GPS. The destination was about 8 miles away, located on the far, isolated side of the city. The drive was lonely. The rain was hitting the windshield hard, and the streets grew darker and darker as I drove away from the bright city center. The GPS led me down a narrow, bumpy road with no streetlights. Finally, the automated voice told me I had arrived at my destination. The house was a tiny, old wooden cottage. It sat on a large, empty lot, covered in overgrown grass and wild weeds. There were no neighboring houses nearby. The entire property was completely dark. Not a single light was on, inside or outside the house. It looked totally abandoned. I pulled my jacket tight around my shoulders, grabbed the heavy food box from the seat, and stepped out into the pouring rain. I walked up the cracked concrete path to the front porch. I found the doorbell and pushed it. I stood there shivering, waiting for the old man to open the door. Nothing happened. I looked through the dark windows, but I could not see anything inside. I began to worry that the old man had given me a fake address or a wrong number. I did not want to waste my time standing in the storm. I pressed the doorbell a second time, pushing it harder this time. Still, the house remained completely silent and still. I waited for another minute. The rain was soaking through my shoes, and I was losing my patience. I decided to give up. I turned around to walk back to the car. As I turned my body, something caught my eye. I looked toward the large glass window next to the front door. My heart stopped. Someone was standing right behind the glass. I froze in fear. I stepped backward, my heart hammering against my chest. I tried to calm myself down. I walked a little closer to the window to get a better look. It was an old man. He looked like he was nearly 80 years old. He was wearing a pale, faded shirt. He was standing perfectly still, like a ghost, just staring directly into my eyes. His face was completely blank. He had no expression, no movement, and his eyes did not blink. I cleared my throat and yelled through the glass, "Sir, I have your food delivery. That will be $20. The old man did not move a muscle. He did not look at the food box in my hands. He just kept staring at my face. I thought that maybe he was deaf or could not hear well because of the loud rain. I took a deep breath and screamed the words much louder through the window. Suddenly, the blank expression vanished from his face. A massive smile stretched across his mouth. It was not a happy, warm, or welcoming smile. It was a wide, unnatural, and terrifying grin. His mouth stretched so wide it looked painful. His eyes opened wide, filled with a wild and malicious energy. A cold chill ran straight down my spine, and the hair on my arms stood up. That face terrified me to my core. I realized something was deeply wrong with this situation. I did not care about the money anymore, and I did not care about the tip. I dropped the food box right on the wet porch, turned around, and ran as fast as I could to the car. I jumped into the driver's seat and locked all the doors immediately. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely put the key into the ignition. I started the engine, desperately wanting to leave this creepy place. Before I shifted the car into drive, a strange feeling compelled me to look to my side. I turned my head to look through the passenger window. The old man was standing right there. He was right outside my car door, his face pressed almost flat against the wet window glass. He was staring in at me, wearing the exact same horrible, wide grin. He had moved from inside the dark house to the outside of my car in just a matter of seconds, without making a single sound in the gravel. I let out a loud scream. I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal. The tires spun in the mud, and the car roared down the dark, empty road. I didn't look at the rearview mirror. I just drove as fast as the car could go until I saw the bright lights of the main highway. I never told my manager the full truth about what happened that night, but I made one thing very clear to him. I would never work a late-night shift again. It was a warm summer evening 4 years ago, back when I was still a senior in high school. I worked part-time at a local burger joint to save up money for college. It was nearing the end of my shift, and I was looking forward to going home, watching a movie, and finally relaxing. Just as I was about to punch my time card, my manager called out from the kitchen. He handed me a large brown paper bag filled with food and told me I had one last delivery to make before I could leave. I took the bag and walked out to the parking lot. My car back then was a beat-up, dark blue 2002 Honda Civic. It was old, dented, and the radio barely worked, but it was reliable and perfect for a student working a delivery job. I sat in the driver's seat, opened my phone, and typed the address into my GPS map. I lived upstate in a very rural, countryside area. Out here, houses were miles apart, and almost every single delivery involved a long, lonely drive. I shifted the car into drive and pulled out of the lot. As I started driving, I noticed the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in deep shades of orange and purple. It was probably right around 7 o'clock in the evening. The GPS led me away from the paved main roads and deeper into the countryside. Soon, I was driving down narrow, unpaved dirt roads surrounded by thick, dense forests. The tall trees blocked out most of the fading sunlight, making the road feel much darker than it actually was. Dust kicked up behind my car as I drove deeper into the woods. After a solid 15 minutes of navigating the bumpy terrain, the automated voice on my phone finally announced that I had arrived at my destination. I pulled the car to a stop and looked through the windshield. Situated in the middle of absolutely nothing but endless woods was an old, small, 2-story cabin. It was made almost entirely of dark, weathered wood that looked like it had been rotting for decades. The property was completely isolated, with no neighbors or streetlights anywhere in sight. The front yard was totally unkept. The grass had grown incredibly tall, reaching all the way up to knee height, and wild weeds were choking the front porch. In my line of work, you get used to seeing strange, neglected houses in the country, so I didn't think much of it at first. I just wanted to get this over with. I grabbed the heavy bag of food from the passenger seat, stepped out of my car, and began walking toward the house. The tall grass brushed against my jeans as I made my way up the creaky wooden steps of the front porch. When I reached the front door, I looked around for a doorbell, but there wasn't one. I raised my fist and knocked loudly on the thick wooden door 3 times. The sound echoed through the quiet forest. For a few seconds, there was total silence. Then, within about 10 seconds, I heard the distinct, heavy sound of footsteps hitting the wooden floorboards on the inside of the house. The footsteps approached the front door quickly, but then they suddenly stopped right on the other side. An uncomfortable wave of uneasiness washed over me. The silence returned, but it felt different now. I got a heavy, sickening feeling that I was being watched. That was when my eyes focused on the center of the door, and I noticed a small, dusty peephole. I realized someone was likely standing right there, looking straight through the glass at me. Trying to sound brave, I called out, "Delivery! I have your food order." There was a long pause. Then a low, harsh, and raspy voice spoke from the other side of the door. The voice didn't sound friendly at all. It told me to take the food and bring it around to the backyard. I immediately disliked the idea. Every instinct in my body told me that going into a dark, isolated backyard behind a strange house was a terrible plan. Something felt deeply wrong. "Are you sure, sir?" I called out, keeping my voice steady. "I can just leave the bag right here on the front porch for you." The person didn't answer my question. I stood perfectly still, listening closely. I didn't hear the sound of footsteps walking away from the door. The person was still standing right there, watching me through the peephole. I felt a strong urge to turn around, run back to my Honda, and drive away. But then I remembered my manager. The last time I brought an order back to the shop because a house looked too creepy, he gave me a massive attitude and threatened to cut my hours. I really needed this job. Reluctantly, I decided to just get it done quickly. I stepped off the porch and walked through the thick, knee-high grass, making my way around the side of the dark wooden cabin. As I rounded the corner into the backyard, I saw a small metal shed and a stone patio. On the patio, there was a round table surrounded by 4 matching chairs. I noticed that one of the chairs was occupied. A person was sitting in the seat, facing completely away from me, so I could only see the back of their head and shoulders. I breathed a small sigh of relief, thinking this was just a customer relaxing in their yard. I began walking across the patio toward the table. "Excuse me, sir," I said politely, holding up the bag. "I have your delivery." The person in the chair didn't move an inch. They didn't turn around, nod, or acknowledge me at all. They sat perfectly stiff and still. I took another step closer, feeling the tension return to my chest. "Excuse me," I said again, my voice much louder this time. Still, there was absolutely no reaction. Then, from directly behind me, a voice shattered the silence. "Over here." I spun around so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. A man was poking his head out from around the far corner of the cabin. He was staring directly at me, his eyes wide, with a giant, crazed, and terrifying smile stretched across his face. "Come over here," the man whispered loudly, his grin widening. "I want to show you something." A jolt of pure adrenaline hit my system. Total panic set in. I didn't wait to find out what he wanted to show me. I turned around and sprinted in the opposite direction, running around the other side of the cabin as fast as my legs could carry me. For some strange reason, my survival instinct didn't tell me to drop the food, so I was still clutching the heavy paper bag tightly against my chest as I ran. I burst through the tall front grass, bolted up to my car, and practically threw myself into the driver's seat. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and shoved the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I threw the car into reverse, kicking up rocks and dirt as I backed out of the driveway. I shifted into drive and floored the gas pedal, speeding down the dark dirt roads without looking back once. On my way back toward the town, my hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold the steering wheel. I pulled over to the shoulder of a main road, took a deep breath, and called the police to report what had just happened. A few days later, an officer followed up with me. He informed me that deputies went out to investigate the old wooden cabin. To my absolute horror, they discovered that the house was completely abandoned. There was no electricity, no running water, and no signs of anyone having lived or stayed inside that house for a very long time. I quit my delivery job just a few days after that phone call. To this day, I have no idea what would have happened to me if I had walked over to that man at the corner of the house. But even now, 4 years later, what haunts me the most is the patio chair. I still wish I had taken just 1 second to turn the chair around, just to see who or what was sitting so perfectly still in the dark.